Thank you very much. Also turns out there's a lot of construction noise in the background. I did apply a microphone filter, so it should have fixed that. If you cannot hear me very well, please just interrupt me and let me know, then I will try to fix it. So yeah, I will start with sharing my screen as well. Right. So yes, I have the great opportunity to represent the student perspective today. So thank you very much for that. So as was mentioned in the introduction, ESN is basically the largest student-led organization in the field of mobility in Europe. And our motto is basically students helping students. And we are present in 42 countries with more than 500 local associations. Together, we cover more than 1,000 higher education institutions, and our roughly 15,000 volunteers, they take care of 350,000 international students every year. So just some background info for those who are not familiar with what ESN is doing. And our vision is basically that we want to support the enrichment of society through international students. So yeah, we are very much connected to the students directly. And also with all the activities that ESN is organizing, we are trying to cover 6 courses in total. There's education youth, which is of course quite obvious when working in higher education mobility. Then there's culture, health and well-being, employability, environmental sustainability, but also social inclusion. And it's very important to us that when we do try to support students on their mobility, we also support students from disadvantaged backgrounds. So social inclusion is very, very important to us. So yeah, allow me to just do a little bit of talking with this slide without lots of visualization. I will continue with that later. So yeah, student voice, why should you listen to it? That's the main question here. So I'm of course very grateful that I got invited here because our past working relationship, especially with ASEF, for example, and other stakeholders, was very great. And we're very honored that those stakeholders, they continue to listen to our opinion. But maybe like for the entire group of participants, like why should you even listen to me as a student? That's a good question, I guess. As ESN, we are directly connected to the target group, which are students. Most of us are students and most of us have been on mobility ourselves. But more importantly, on the local level, our volunteers are in direct contact with international students every day. They often have a very close personal bond with them. They know their wants and needs. And this helps us for outward communication because we reach a large number of students through our communication channels every day. But also with all these international students, we have access to a huge data pool when we want to assess the success of implementation of mobility programs. We use this data pool very frequently, and later I will show you the result of 2 very large-scale surveys that we conducted. One specifically about challenges in mobility for disadvantaged groups, and the other one about challenges during the initial COVID-19 outbreak. If you do consider the student body as a stakeholder, then we are the most powerful by numbers because there's hundreds of thousands of us. However, at stakeholder meetings, there's most of the time only 1 or 2 student representatives present. So therefore, the ratio is not really much in our favor. So for example, if there's 1 representative for a higher education institution that has a staff of, I don't know, 5,000, there have probably been many emails and meetings before that representational function to make sure that their representation reflects like the opinion of all the staff. And with 5,000, that is already challenging. So look at 1 student representative per hundreds of thousands of students. I've been that representative many times, and if there were questions that I could answer based on statistical data, I always do that because instead saying of my own opinion, because in my view, that's the more appropriate thing to do. But there have been many instances where I've been asked very specific questions that concern students from all backgrounds, but I had to answer with my opinion. So basically the opinion of a 23-year-old female student from Germany. So even if my title is student representative, what I'm saying is not really representative at all. Also with students, so we haven't finished our education yet. We do not have a liaison career in specific fields that are very relevant here in policymaking. And even if a stakeholder selects a student representative they think is qualified, at the most we have like 5 years of experience, maybe in a position we're not doing full time because mostly it's volunteer work. We don't really have proper knowledge transfer and we are essentially self-taught. So compared to all of you with often decades of experience, we're absolute newbies. So that's probably a good reason why we are not very much represented in policy dialogue, right? I personally disagree because, for one, not having this experience can be beneficial because we're not as stuck in old frameworks due to years of working in the same position, and therefore we can bring new perspectives. But also the world is so fast-paced nowadays that the student perspective really changes so quickly. It's absolutely crucial to assess it continuously. But the main reason why I think it's worth to listen to us is because there is actually something I am for sure better than all of you. And that might sound really cocky right now, but I'm 100% confident in that statement, because what I'm talking about, what I'm so good at is, well, being a student today. It's what I and every other student are the greatest expert at. What is it like to be a student today, right? So this is why, in my opinion, our views should be considered as well, because if you are in a policy-making dialogue and you wonder what the impact of your new measures could be, just ask the students, because nowadays we really want to be active citizens. Students want to voice their opinion, but that also needs, they need to be, they need to get the impression that their opinion is being heard, and enabling the young generation to take action is something really fundamental and important, because honestly, we don't want to wait decades until we can become decision makers, especially not in matters that affect us now, because there's nothing more frustrating than being a target group about which decisions are constantly being made, with no chance to actually challenge decisions if they affect us negatively. So in ESN, we are very passionate about making the student voice heard and often make use of the very large pool of students we can consult. So therefore, I would like to present some objective student voices with statistical data instead of just presenting my subjective opinion. And for that, I have prepared the outcomes of 2 of our surveys. The first survey is part of the Social Inclusion and Engagement in Mobility project, also for short CM, which ASEF also supported us, for example, to collect more input from Asian students as well. And the methodology was that we asked about 13,000 students, almost 1,000 staff members. We had some focus group of students and even conducted physical study visits. So yes, a very large data pool. And I will just show you a couple of outcomes there, just very roughly, some that I thought would be interesting here. For example, when it comes to the strategy and the offer of mobility programs, what were some key findings? When we asked staff, then 93% said that their institution did include outgoing mobility in their strategy, but only a third of respondents included reference to disadvantaged groups specifically in their strategy. So you can see there's still much room for improvement here. And when we asked, does your institution have a diversity and inclusion strategy? About 2/3 of staff members said yes, they do, but still 30% said no. So while yes, there are a lot of institutions who do have that, there's still a lot of room of improvement here as well. When we look at barriers to mobility, why do some students refrain from going abroad, especially disadvantaged students? There are 3 types of barriers we can identify: institutional, which really reflect the technicalities of the mobility program itself; environmental, which is like the largest category. It can be almost anything, but for example, access to information or lack thereof could be an environmental factor, or the personal background, especially in disadvantaged groups. And then finally, attitudinal barrier types. This is basically the belief system of the student themselves, because even if they have all the opportunities to go and all the needs are taken care of, as long as they're not convinced that they're capable of going on mobility, they won't go. So we asked non-mobile students, why did they not go abroad? So unsurprisingly, lack of funding is the largest factor, but then a lot of technicalities with the program itself. So like the strategical factors, basically, that it's not flexible enough, or they were worried that it would extend their academic career, basically. Then also lack of knowledge was also kind of an important factor. But interestingly enough, only 2% said the reason was that they were just not interested in going abroad. So you can see the will to go abroad is really there. 98% would technically be interested. So this is basically the numbers we could have if we wanted, if we supported them enough. So when it comes to student support, what kind of supports do students need and what do they get? We asked students who did go on mobility what kind of activities before the departure was useful. And mainly it was informational meetings or events that they said was useful, because talking to the international office, for example, is very informative, or having briefing events, definitely as well, but also social events, and then specifically events organized by the student organizations themselves were also deemed as quite useful. But however, something that I thought was kind of heartbreaking, because in 2021 that it's still such an important factor, health concerns raised by students, even in Europe, which does have European like universal healthcare and everything. And I thought this quote was quite, yeah, really heartbreaking. So a student said, I was ill several times during the mobility and started having problems with my mental health. It's incredibly hard when you don't have people you can lean on. I guess everybody who went on mobility can relate to the last sentence. I can as well. So yeah, we can see there's still like a lot of areas where there's still work to do. And then if we look at the experiences that the students had, challenges and impact. Fortunately, 76% said they had positive experiences while abroad. I don't know about you, but I personally was surprised that the number is not higher. And sadly enough, more than a third of students felt that they were treated differently or unfairly at their host university, and 15% thought they did not have equal access to resources and opportunities compared to home students, which I think is also quite shocking, really. And when it comes to discrimination, about 3/4 of students said they did not experience any form of discrimination during their mobility. However, almost a quarter did. And again, I was shocked when I saw that. And there's discrimination that could be nationality and race, ethnicity mainly, but also gender and social status as well. And again, I think that is so sad, because we're 2021 and this is still happening. So from those results, we developed some kind of recommendations, 14 in total. I will not introduce all of them. I will just give some examples, and we sent them to the European Commission, to national agencies and higher education institutions themselves, and also to student organizations. The first one I would like to say is, well, it's quite obvious, develop a strategy that ensures that all students with few opportunities are supported. Higher education institutions, they can make sure that this is included in their individual strategy and align basically their plans with national action plans. National agencies, they can make sure that underrepresented groups are supported in their policy actions. And then finally, on the government level, in the European case, it's the European Commission, they need to support national agencies and institutions to develop those strategies. Then enhance collaboration. National agencies can enhance collaboration on the national level with governmental agencies, for example, or civil society organizations. And higher education institutions, they could, for example, appoint specific inclusive mobility officer that kind of supports the collaboration of departments, and also offer different mobility programs that have a variety of duration, because one semester of mobility is not possible for everybody, for example, out of financial reasons, or also because of health reasons. Then, very importantly, for me, coming from a student organization, work with students. National agencies can foster and support student networks. Higher education institutions can include, very importantly, students in the strategy development and support student and student organizations in getting involved. And then, of course, I also need to talk about international student organizations. Yes, we also need to actively participate in the dialogue, which is what I'm doing here. And
Olivia, you have a few more minutes. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. I will try to wrap up quickly. So yeah, and then finally encourage students to discuss concerns, because national agencies, they should collaborate more with student representatives, higher education institutions, they should organize feedback sessions and directly ask students for their feedback. But then again, international students, of course, need to get involved as well. We published a research report that where you could read everything in detail if you're interested. I sent it to Reka for the supplementary material. And we also developed guidelines for inclusive mobility promotion, and also if anyone's interested in inclusive communication manual. I also sent that to Reka to forward to you after the session. And then secondly, just very briefly, we also did a survey about student exchanges in time of crisis. We did that basically at the beginning of the pandemic, about May last year. So this all reflects really the first response from higher education institutions when the pandemic first hit. And I just have 3 really short findings because I thought they were interesting. So when we asked students what kind of informations were accessible to them, honestly, almost like around half of the students did not get any information in inappropriate language, about travel restrictions, about health concerns, everything. And of course, like we've advanced so much since the pandemic just didn't stop. But again, I think it's really interesting to see how much went wrong there. And I think we can just use it to learn from mistakes. When we asked students what kind of support they received, fortunately, most of them received academic support, but many of them, for example, reported mental health issues, and only 17% of students received psychological support, which I think is also kind of sad. And then finally, what kind of support did their home universities offer? Well, fortunately, around a third were academically supported, but then again, mental health, only a bit more than 10% received that kind of support. And a quarter did not receive support at all, and about a third were just like caught up in confusing communication and everything. So again, we've advanced far past that, fortunately, after the pandemic continues, but again, I think it's important to just learn from mistakes. So we also developed a couple of recommendations, for example, that all measures by the institution should be looked at through the lens of equity and diversity to make sure solutions for students from disadvantaged backgrounds are offered in the emergency response, and ensure equity, diversity, and inclusion actions in the recovery plans as well. So yeah, just to wrap this up, how to include students? Well, at the beginning of the presentation, I made my point why the student perspective is worth listening to, but is it actually being heard? Because I was asked to share my experiences in working with stakeholders in different levels. I can wholeheartedly stress that many stakeholders are doing a tremendous job at including the student perspective, even on higher level policy dialogue, especially, for example, ASEF. But that is not always the case. We're often not taken seriously, for example, for the points that I made earlier about lack of experience. Some might even view us as childish because, especially my generation, Gen Z, is sometimes very blunt and almost aggressive in advocacy. And as a member of Gen Z, I can only hypothesize that this is partly due to feeling like oftentimes our hands are tied, basically, and that people are not listening or that our voices do not reach the right ears. Many young people react by just getting louder, and whether that's the right step is, of course, up for debate. But with you giving us the impression that we are being heard without making any of those unkept efforts, and by talking to us at eye level, we are more than capable of being professional, I can assure that. And on higher education institution level, frankly, this is a subjective point for me. Encouraging critical thinking is so important because besides ASEAN, I, for example, work with teenagers in schools. And honestly, the level of abstract thinking and debating about really controversies they are able to do that is so astounding. So help them unleash these abilities by showing them how to think critically. So yeah, but how do you include students? First of all, rely on bottom-up information flow. Policymakers contact your institution for information, for example, about how well new measures are working, consult students directly. But of course, that's not so simple. So how could that work? First, utilize student organizations like us, for example. With the survey results, I think I made the point how helpful our close connection with the target group can be when assessing data. And we are always more than happy to help assess the student voice. So higher education institutional representatives, talk to your local student organizations. They will connect you to the target group, I promise you. And then secondly, and finally, ensure direct representation of the target groups in decision-making dialogues. This could be student liaison bodies on faculty level, steering groups, or representatives of disadvantaged groups in discussion rounds, anything really. And not only for producing output, but also for evaluating existing output. So ask students for their feedback. So yeah, I guess crucial is that you should try to build relationships with your students. So don't just treat us as data points, basically, but as your successors, because we want to thrive and get to where you are in a couple of years. So just help us with that, because the will to do it is definitely there. So yeah, sorry if I started to ramble at the end. This is there was from my perspective. Again, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to voice the students' view on everything, and thank you for listening.